All right, time to get started. Welcome to Provide Maximum Security Using Zero Trust, a security seminar brought to you by Sherweb. I'm Guillaume Boisvert. I'll be your host for the day. We have a very exciting lineup of people that are here to talk to you about different aspects of security. We will all try to make it as practical as possible, as actionable as possible. This is all new things that we're presenting. I'm very excited to be here today. We put a simple quote here: a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I'm sure you've heard that before. It couldn't be more true about security. We are not here to sell you security as a product, as one thing that you buy to have security. We are here to introduce a number of concepts that we hope will help you achieve enough security for the people that you are working with. We live in a very interesting time where there is more and more to worry about when it comes to security. And information is the best weapon. We hope that we will be providing something that you can use today. Like I mentioned, Guillaume Boisvert, I'm Director of Product Innovation at Sherweb, been around for more than 7 years now, and I've always been in IT my whole life. I've focused on cybersecurity for the past 4 years or so now, but it's always been a big part of my life. Not always on the right side of cybersecurity, but I think that's how most people learn, so that's pretty exciting. I'll be joined a little bit later by Henry Chang, who's a product marketing manager for security at Sherweb. And before we get started, here's a quick overview of our agenda. We'll be presenting zero trust and practical aspects, a little bit of how to get started with it. Then it will be Seth Robinson from CompTIA, who's you can see right now is joining us today. Hi, Seth.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Who will be doing his presentation about different aspects of zero trust and how you can think about it and consider it, and also the human aspects of cybersecurity. We will have a brief pause over lunch, but it will be content there as well to keep you entertained. As we rejoin, we'll be joined by Rachel Tobac, who's a well-known expert in social engineering and cybersecurity in general. A very interesting presentation, and I hope that you guys will stick around for that. And then we'll end the day with everybody back together for a panel on cybersecurity, a little bit of this open discussion. All day, everything will be recorded. So if you have to leave or something like that, God forbid, we'll send you a link to a recording. Sorry. Also, if you have questions, please use the software. Send us your question. There's a Q&A box. We will address them generally at the end of the presentation, but it'd be great if we had your participation. We will review those questions, might include them in the panel at the end of the day. This is the second security seminar for Sherweb. I was a big part of the first one. It went great. It's the reason that we did it again this time, and we did it bigger. We had some guests the first time, but I think the lineup today is particularly strong. I'm very excited for you guys to hear what Seth and Rachel have to say. Our presentation is good, but I'm a harsh critic towards my own work. We ordered it that way, so we'll give you a little bit of an introduction. Seth will sort of push it a little bit further, and then Rachel will be a deep dive on the social engineering aspect. Because of Murphy's laws, I have a little bit of a sore throat today. I haven't had anything for like 8 months of living in my basement, but my kids went back to school, so now a little bit of a sore throat. We'll power through it. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. Got my safety mug. I'll be all right. So let's get started. I think it'll be the best thing for everybody. So why should you care a little bit about zero trust? And the first thing that we'll do is we'll explain what it is. I think it's a good place to get started. Once you have those concepts a little bit clearer, it'll be easier to sort of wrap your head around the recommendation and the thing that we suggest. Like I said, we'll make it very, very practical. So the content today of our presentation will be why is traditional cybersecurity a little bit flawed in this day and age? What does zero trust security mean on a practical level? How to get started, and how Sherweb can help. It is a very conscious choice that you'll hear very little about Sherweb product and services today. We make it part of presentation where it fits, but that's not our focus. We have a ton of content specifically about our product, about Office Protect and things like that in our library. Go to our YouTube channel, talk to your account representative, sign up if you're not signed up. We'll talk about that like 10 minutes throughout the whole day. But the rest of it, we want to really make it about giving you practical information and hopefully getting some of your feedback. Now, let me pass it over to my colleague Henry, who will be doing the introduction to Zero Trust.
Hello, good morning, rather, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I apologize for being a little bit late, but hey, fashionably late is always good, I would say. So thank you for that introduction, Guillaume. So what I'm going to just quickly go through is just explain why traditional cybersecurity is just ever so slightly flawed. So if we look at what we call traditional cybersecurity, and what we're clearly referencing is perimeter-based security. And by that, we mean that with a collection of, excuse me a second, with a collection of tools and devices and services and so on, such as something that manages identity, something that restricts access to network-only resources to accredited or authenticated users, and just having permission management of roles and other users and so on. We created a perimeter. We created something that effectively is a castle, right? And the thinking here is that anybody who can successfully get inside this castle, who actually occupies a space there, can be trusted and should be trusted, and that anybody outside of this should not be, and not just any person, but any account and so on and the like. Now, so the notion of this perimeter being a safe hold, a castle, if you will, is that, well, sure, you have definitely people inside who are protected and who you should be able to trust, except you really can't, because in a castle, that's where the Red Wedding happened, for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans might know. And the thing is, anybody who's inside, sure, they had enough access to get in, fantastic. However, there's two possibilities here. One, they're malicious and they're actively trying to bring harm to you or your organization. Or alternately, and what's even more likely, is that people can be careless, people may have a lack of awareness, or people might just make a simple human error, which does happen. Just for example, earlier this year, entire Navy base was basically crippled for a few hours because somebody opened an email by accident, right? So the idea here that by being inside a perimeter, trust can be conferred and should be maintained, it's a bit of a fallacy. In fact, nothing can be trusted over the long term. You need to constantly reevaluate. So that's at least in part why there's a problem. And that's only part of it, though. If we move on, and just consider our current context, our current modern workplace, especially in light of this pandemic, there is a lot of remote workers, remote workforces. There's a lot of cloud services, in addition to the people who actually work on premises, who have access to actual physical hardware and infrastructure and the like. And all of these things need to communicate with one another, and there's always all sorts of access requests are constantly flying all around. And the simple fact of the matter is, because of this, you can see that it's not really a perimeter at all. It's porous. You should still maintain some degree of perimeter for sure, for simplicity or for workflow sake. But for security, it doesn't quite work. So that's those are reasons why. Now, I've said all this, right? And I need to be clear. We're talking about zero trust here today, and we got started with saying that traditional perimeter-based security doesn't quite work. What we're patently not talking about now, though, in zero trust, we're not talking about a better perimeter. It's not a next generation perimeter at all that we're talking about. And we're not just talking about, say, a more modern implementation or better implementation of VPNs and so on. We're just not, right? Zero trust, it's neither of those, right? It's also not a singular product or a singular solution, because as we'll cover very shortly, zero trust encapsulates a lot of different tenets, a lot of different functions and features, and a lot of things that have to be taken care of in order for you to properly execute this over any point in time. And because of just how widespread say like the security breaches or vulnerabilities can be. This isn't something that just the IT department has to worry about. It's not just an IT function. Cybersecurity, well, zero trust security, but even more broadly, cybersecurity is something that everybody has to be involved in, right? And also because threats are always expanding and always evolving, implementing security using a zero trust security framework, it's not a one and done deal. It's something that is progressive. It's something that's long term. It's something that has to be planned and phased and constantly evaluated and reassessed. So
One of
that's
the
what.
thing that
Yes.
one of the things that we've heard in conversation with security experts and people that do managed service is often the shorter route, or what vendors are bringing to the table when you talk about zero trust, is simply to reshape how they do network security. So they'll bring on like network segmentation or micro segmentation of network, for example, and say, well, so network security has changed, now it's zero trust, and that's how you do zero trust with network security. I think that's a bit of a shortcut that probably I wouldn't recommend. There is really a change in philosophy that needs to be applied. And after that, tools are tools, and you'll find the right ones. And the things that you know about cybersecurity are not gone. This isn't validating them. They'll be applied. It's just there is a real advantage, or there is a real change in the philosophy that needs to be sort of applied in how you think about it. And a lot of it has to do with priority and what you prioritize and how you kind of structure it. And we'll talk about that just now. But I think ideally for the people that know a lot about traditional security or current security, um, the do yourself a favor, and I don't mean that aggressively, but if you give yourself a chance to think about it differently, and don't try to apply what you know directly to this right away. Give yourself a chance to discover it, and then I think the pieces will fall into place pretty quickly, and a lot of what you know will still be very applicable.
In fact, that's actually a really good bridge to this next slide, because in fact, that's very, very true. We're not in fact advocating you throw any of what you know away. In fact, you're going to actually have to call on that knowledge to really be able to understand it. And when you do, it actually becomes that pretty simple, really. But just so that we actually have some tangible milestones of zero trust. As you can see, zero trust really it's kind of buzzy right now, and there's a lot of talk about it. But really, its roots it starts nearly 20 years ago. So roughly 16 years ago, that's when the first real public notion of deperimeterization actually occurred, and this was at the Jericho Forum. And the idea is pretty much like the at the core of zero trust. Just the notion that things inside a perimeter aren't necessarily trustworthy, or aren't necessarily always going to be trustworthy. And the U.S. Department of Defense and DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, then expanded that notion somewhat with something they put together called Black Core Architecture, which is just fancy speak for saying encrypt everything within a network as for greater security. But again, it's the same idea. Why would you need to do that if there's trust conferred across the entirety of everything inside that network? And then a few more years after that, in 2009, that's when the official term zero trust actually becomes formalized by Forrester. And that's what, so if you do the math, that's about 11 years ago. So it's something that's been around for a little while, but just slowly but surely it's been gathering steam. And part of that, part of the building blocks of that steam gathering happened with Google, because after a fairly major breach in 2009, Google actually went fairly whole hog in with zero trust. They call it Beyond Core, but really in the end, what they've done is that they've implemented zero trust across the entirety of their operations, and making sure that there's constant evaluations and authentications and so on of every access request inside their environment. Now,
I saw their Beyond Core presentation at RSA, the conference in 2017, and I don't think they used the term zero trust once in that presentation. It may have to do with like not wanting to promote somebody else's idea, but it was clearly the zero trust concept, but they didn't call it that. So it took me a little bit to sort of catch up.
Yep, no, absolutely. That's quite true. And now, 10 years after they introduced the formal concept of zero trust, Forrester has expanded it to, they call it now Zero Trust Extended Ecosystem. But really, in the end, it's zero trust, but as applied to cloud services and the cloud environment. And I'm obviously underselling it, but just a quick bullet point, obviously. And then very recently, just a little over a month ago, NIST actually went out and did its final version and publication of the tenets of zero trust security, which a lot of which is actually what we'll be breaking down and explaining in today's presentation, actually. So with that, I believe Guillaume is eminently more qualified to talk about this than I, so off we go.
That's debatable, but thank you, Henry. That was very good. So don't hesitate if you have questions, or even if some of the notions you're in a bit of a disagreement or you have something to add, it's all good. We love feedback from people that are actively out in the field and applying these concepts and dealing with cybersecurity on a day-to-day basis. Your feedback is invaluable. We're just here to sort of centralize that information and share it with you, but I encourage you to participate as much as possible. So
yes, please do.
As Henry mentioned, we are working off the NIST document on zero trust architecture. It had been in a draft form for a while, and now beginning middle of last month,
August
it was
11th.
released as the official release, like the final version. It's a interesting yet sort of dense document, but it's very good. I think NIST does a great job with what they do, and they generally have a tendency to make it fairly practical. So it's something that everybody can read and appreciate. Basically, what we're going to do today is give you some cliff notes and also add a little bit of a practical aspect to it. NIST is very careful not to recommend vendors, so we'll do that a little bit. Also give you some simpler steps, like they give you what you should be building. Sometimes it's not that accessible. Sometimes it's good to have simpler steps that you can do a little bit cheaper, a little bit faster. No need to invest yourself as much. So let's get started because it's going to take a little bit. There's 7 of them. The first one is fairly straightforward, but it is a big part of the concept. It's that everything is a resource. And when they say everything is a resource, they mean everything is a resource. So all data and computing services are resources. Everything, one way to think about it is everything that contain, access, or sends data. We split our slide into basic things that you could do, and that is like tomorrow you should be able to do that or get started at least, and it should bring you value. If something is there and you're like, well, what would I do that doesn't help me at all, put it in the comment section, let us know, and we can talk about it and we can review what we're saying. Our appreciation amongst our discussion with other sysadmins and security experts is that it would bring real value. In this case, I think performance document complete inventory discovery is obvious and yet often sort of neglected depending on the type of customers that you have. And caveat on this, if most of your clients, or if you're thinking about your clients that have very strict compliance requirements, chances are you're doing most of the basic stuff and you'll be looking at the more advanced stuff. If you're a general MSP and you have a number of clients and you're looking to improve that security because, well, we all should, then that stuff may make a lot of sense. So let's talk about that inventory. You can use tools to do that. It's a good idea, makes it easier. But even if you don't, if you have smaller clients, best effort, the discovery is still going to be very good. You need to document. One thing that we bring to the table is, especially with work at home and bring your own device, make sure you don't forget people's own device as being, so as soon as they access something of enterprise data or enterprise service or enterprise application, and I don't mean enterprise as far as the size, I mean like the company that you're trying to protect, either data, services, or application, then it's a resource that you should be taking into account as you devise your security strategy. Same thing for cloud services. We see it a lot. Like people have like great security around their network, their perimeter, even the remote workers. But then let's say Microsoft 365 sort of stands on its own. Well, ask yourself, is there critical data or is there even important business data into Microsoft 365? And if the answer is no, I'll be shocked. So don't forget applications either, mobile applications and everything. And as you move forward, Internet of Things probably is the last one that Like, do I really need to take into account the security of my eating system, like that's now smart, or my fridge, or more likely my security cameras, or if you're working with industrial clients, then they probably have equipment that's connected, and you have to take into account the security because they're there, they could have access, lateral movement is possible and everything. So if they have flaw, need to keep them up to date, that becomes a resource. So all those things become resources. If you want to take that sort of process further, of everything is a resource, then you really should automate your discovery and your inventory with things like network scanners or CASB for cloud services. A quick word on CASB, so that's Cloud Access Security Broker. It's a new-ish, but when we say Zero Trust is new and it's 20 or 16 years old, CASB is definitely new. And basically what it does is it will centralize all interaction with cloud services and allow you to control it. We went a little bit quickly about the focus on Zero Trust. One of the major tenet is identity. Much more of the security is centered around identity instead of the network. Like we spoke, that the network was a little bit, the concept of network security was evolving. One of the ways it's evolving is towards identity instead of networks. So CASB is more geared toward managing your identity when it comes to cloud services, but data communication as well. The other thing regarding inventory, if you want to push it a little bit further, I put it in the advanced, could really be in the basics as well. I would do it if I were you, is make sure you classify your resources. So resources are everything that we just talked about. Make sure you have a certain amount of classification, because we're very realistic. At Sherweb, we work with partner, we understand there isn't an infinite amount of time you can invest in this. Your clients don't have an infinite amount of money to pay. So if you create classes, stuff that's critical, stuff that's a little bit less critical, stuff that's completely benign, and it should be kept private, but secure is a different conversation in that case. So with that, you can prioritize. So with having priority, you can do two things. You can make sure you invest your time and security dollar into those more critical aspects. But not just that, is you can devise much more stringent and strict policies for those things that are classified as high risk, high value. Just moving along, there's a number of things. Tenet 2, secure all communications. So what that means is generally, if you're using like cloud services and things like that, they'll be over HTTPS, you're okay, they're secured, there's authentication, and then there's encryption, and then there's authorization to access things. But this should be expanded to more than just outside your perimeter. So think about it. Do you have internal communication that are not secured? I'll give you the example at Sherweb, because we're not perfect. We have some services.
Yes, we are.
Into a lot of detail. But we do have some services that are exposed internally, where you can access, let's say, some kind of web service internally because you are internal to Sherweb, but you can't access it from the outside. Well, if you think the Zero Trust philosophy, that should never happen, because what is outside will eventually become inside, and then you've given a target to somebody that, so they break in a little bit by just getting into your network. The idea with Zero Trust is you should limit the amount of damage that they will be able to do. And lateral movement and all that is everything that they do, the hackers. They'll break in a little bit, and then because they're into a sensitive places that you trust, they'll be able to maximize their damage or benefit or whatever it is that they want to do. So all these things are there not to say that you'll never be hacked, because I've had clients that gave their MFA token to somebody that called them and asked. So like, you do what you can, and I know like there are still weak links, but the idea is that even when somebody that shouldn't have gains access or gains something, it doesn't automatically give them an advantage. So the description says network location alone does not imply trust, and that's an important part of Zero Trust. So apply security measures, so all communication, things like TLS for every communication that you can have, it TLS being encryption like HTTPS. And only expose, this one is simple, but only expose locally what you would expose to the internet, meaning that there should be much controls that are in place to make you confident that there isn't an advantage to being within your network. You can still use like there'll still be a perimeter. You'll still try to keep people out, most likely, like unless you're Google and you invest millions and millions to do the switch like completely. But the idea is you don't gain an advantage by being inside. So advanced version of that, consider advanced control mechanism like network access control from people like Cisco and things like that, or CASB again to help control all communications. Tenet number 3, grant access on a per session basis. So what that means is that trust shouldn't persist without regular review. Provide least privilege to complete a task, and then authorization to one resource does not imply authorization to any other resource. And that people will go, well, obviously, like if they log into my, I don't know, accounting system, it doesn't give them access to my file server. Fair. But think about it this way. When one of your sysadmin logs into a Windows server, does it only give them access for the task that they're out to do? Or is give them complete access to the whole server and to do anything to any type of service that is on it? Most likely gives them access to everything. So conceptually, and this isn't very practical, but conceptually, it should always be, I'm doing this specific task, I get access to do just that. Ideally with an account that can only do that. Practically, think about implementing the simplest form of least privilege philosophy. So those things you can do for sure. So no shared accounts. That's a basic one. It's true of network security, forget zero trust. Make sure you clean up admin accounts of your clients. I have so many clients that were in a situation where their clients had an admin account they didn't really need, but they kept it just because they wanted to keep it. And then that was the point of entry of a giant attack. Centralized log and access, something like a secret server. So let's say there's some devices you can't do one account per user. Less and less true and acceptable as an excuse, but it happens. Make sure you centralize and log access to that information. Something like secret server. Secret server is not it's specifically a product that I've used in the past. It will sort of structure your information and make sure there's a log of who accessed what. Restrict admin access. So Henry, how many admin roles are there in Microsoft 365 by default? Like specific, like global admin and let's say printer manager are 2. How many are there?
I honestly don't know.
So by default, there is 13 roles that are already defined for you to segment the access that you give and the power that you give to each user. Global admin, you should have 2 generally, unless it's a really big company. One that you'll use only when you need it, and another one just to be safe if you get your first one hijacked. Document your process. Document how you investigate like the accounts, how you restrict access, like everything. Make sure there's a documentation for it and it's done systematically, which is the next one. Do it regularly. And then again, simple. I'm not pretending to be the most technical person, but sudo in Linux and run as in Windows is basically built for least access privilege, meaning that sudo, a specific command, means that you'll run just that command as a root admin or administrator in Windows. And that's exactly what you want. The least amount of time having privileges, you don't use the root accounts and everything. Ensure authorization controls are enabled on each resource as available. So I'll give you an example of a situation that I've seen. Won't name names because it's embarrassing, but they had a modern database that was on a local network that was used by an application. So only the application had access to that network, backend network, and then they could get to the database. So they decided not to enable authentication to the database itself because only the application had access, wasn't visible from the internet. Well, it wasn't visible until it was visible, and then they got broken into, and then that step was very, very easy because there was no authentication on the database server. Things like that. Another one is how many in the last year or 2 years, it's been the year of the S3 bucket. So S3 is AWS storage, object storage, and everybody winds up one day or another where their bucket is exposed to the internet. So it was just a test thing, only the dev used it or something, and then it stuck around, and eventually it gets on the internet, and then somebody has access to all your files and things like that. There was huge breach, like medical information and things like that. It was very bad. If you get a little bit more fancy, because this is basic stuff, limit the session length and token lifespan as much as possible practical. Something to consider always in security. If it's not practical, it won't work. Easiest security ever, unplug from the internet. Never get broken in from the internet if you're not plugged in, but then does that make sense to your business? You have to provide, yeah, you have to provide solution that practically will work. So it's all a compromise, but limiting session length and token lifespan is a good way to make sure there's a reevaluation of permission regularly. Implement advanced identity and access management. That's a topic for an old hotter presentation, but that's sort of a path that you can follow if you want to go more advanced there. I'm running a little bit long. Dynamic policies govern resource access, and I think specifically though, a keyword here is dynamic. So we've talked about it already. If you only have like open stuff, that's bad. You should have policies. If you want to implement zero trust, really, you want to have dynamic policies. So access is determined by dynamic policy and considers direct and indirect factors. So here's a few examples to make it practical. You should look at the requester's state. So his identity, obviously, login, password, and then his device, the software versions that he's using. You could deny access if you see that somebody's trying to access with an out-of-date software that there's a known flaw for, is 3 version behind, or whatever it is. Install certificate. So obviously access by certificate is a popular one. And then environmental factors, which are a little bit more indirect, stuff like network location. So see, network location is still here, but it's now one of many factors that you build your security around. That's the change in philosophy, because I've had this pointed out, like, well, zero trust is kind of just a marketing thing because it still uses network location. No, there's a change in philosophy. It's just one of the many factors, the things that you put together to make sure that you are secure. So network location, date time. So let's say I show up to use SharePoint and my identity is good. I'm using a device I've used in the past. Let's say I even have the MFA, but I never connect at 3 a.m. And then one day I connect at 3 a.m. Is that the same? Are those two login the same? If I do it at 1 p.m. or if I do it at 3 a.m., are they the same security-wise? They're really not. Do you deny it completely because of that? Or maybe you just ask for that second factor because it's 3 a.m. When it's middle of the day, you don't, and then when it's 3 a.m., you do. Things like that. And then current attack is a good one. So again, it's middle of the day, 1 p.m., accessing some sensitive resource I actually have the rights to. One day, everything is fine, so I get access. The other day, there is an attack in progress. Should you grant that access during an attack? Probably not, but unless you're very fancy, I have to be honest, I don't think I've been using a system that is smart enough to say, hey, we're currently in an attack, so your login doesn't go anymore. So the more of those factors you can sort of pull together to make an informed decision, the better it is. To give you an example, I talk about Azure AD right here. Microsoft, it's what they do with what they call, what's the exact term they use? So it's not insecure logins, but insecure access, like a suspicious access. Is they'll pull as many of the criteria that they can control and see, and then make a decision on that. So if I were to, what I recommend here is use conditional access, and Azure AD is probably the easiest way to do that. Since most of you are clients of Sherweb, you would use, chances are you have Microsoft 365 under your management. Azure AD conditional access is a very good way to get started there when it comes to access of anything that is connected to your AD. And we can talk about SSO at some of the day. But I would create access rule based on acceptable level of risk, resource sensitivity. I talked about that classification before, so use it here, and business needs. And then you can combine that with MDM, which is mobile device management, and then mobile application management. They're both part of Intune, Microsoft Intune, and there's other products. We love Microsoft, so definitely we recommend it. There are definitely a number of solutions that you can use. The idea is if you combine those things, conditional access becomes smarter. More of the things on the left here that I suggest you consider when making a decision will be available to Azure AD if you have MDM and through iTunes and things like that. I'm pretty sure you could connect it on another system, but Microsoft's biggest advantage is always the connectivity between the different bits that it offers. One of the things that you can do if you like what I'm saying and you like zero trust, I shouldn't make it about me. Like, I didn't invent any of this. Use and create a lockdown modes for end users. So have a panic button. When people get hacked, usually they'll see it. Not usually. So because you are very focused on security, you're making more and more right decisions, you're having more and more smart systems, you'll know fairly quickly that you are under attack or that something bad has happened. Like if you're using Sherweb's Office Protect, for example. But then what do? Like the general reflex is just to suspend the account that you know has a problem, but that's generally not enough. I think if you know positively, not if you have doubt, but if you know you are being hacked, like you've seen it, let's say mail forwarding rules are being created, is usually a pretty good sign that you've been hacked. It's probably a good idea to just lock down everything for a little bit, just to give you a chance to like activate MFA or ban some IPs, but even that's not enough. But I recommend the creation of that lockdown mode. The problem you'll have is how do you tie all the services of your clients together? If they only have Microsoft 365, fairly easy. But if they have a bunch of system, vertical, line of business system, and things like that, they may not tie together very easily. Your AD would be a good place to look to build that thing. PowerShell and an AD is a good combination. And then consider advanced behavioral analysis tool. So you're getting very fancy when you get to that, but it is one factor. I didn't really mention it because I knew it was there. The more advanced systems, they will look at behavior. So all the things that all the actions that led to this action will be taken into consideration when making a decision on granting access or not. It gets very complicated, but at the same time, like that's where the future is going. So I wanted to mention it. We had a conversation with a partner. They were doing, it was a large company, like much larger than our typical companies, but they were doing a test of Cisco, what's the name of it? Tetration.
Tetration.
I'm not going to use
it. Was called tetration.
Yeah, I have it here, but I think you're right. So it was interesting. Like what it does is definitely, yeah, tetration. What it does is very interesting, but the proof of concept basically put the bill at, well, tens of millions of dollars, basically, if they wanted to implement the full system. And I was like, well, all right, that's nice. Maybe not for most people. Number 5, every asset's continued integrity and security must be monitored. So everything that we've said is to improve security when things happen. So you know who's connecting, you know if you grant them access, you only grant them access to what they should have. What this is saying is you might miss something. Something may happen, like somebody that should be trusted was trusted, but now should no longer be. Or they did something they shouldn't have, whatever. Like it's security, it's cybersecurity. It's always something you're not planning for that will happen. What you do is give yourself visibility and limit the damage. So this is it. Every asset's continued integrity and security must be monitored. Assets and resources, again, like everything that I named before, must be continuously and constantly checked for breach, insecure states, and lack of compliance. So it's not because you trust me in the morning that you trust me at night. It's not like because this application was fine today that it's fine tomorrow. It's not because those files weren't hacked that they aren't hacked now. Basic things that you can do to make sure there's a constant monitoring, endpoint protection for your workstation servers, files, for sure. Something like Bitdefender, Microsoft 365 Defender, ATP are the two that we saw. There's 50 of them out there. They're all pretty interesting. Definitely some are better than other, but I'm not going to get into that today. Patch management, vulnerability scanning. I won't name the example. They're there. You can see them. Those are pretty well-known things. Network scanning and email scan I'll mention because it's just an interesting one. So mostly, but not everybody has the solution implemented. So how has it been solved? It's been solved by being able to go back in time and delete files that you trusted an hour ago, because that's what happened. Security services are now pretty smart, pretty efficient. The new malware that they'll get will be accepted at first because nobody has seen it. And then an hour later, you see it a bunch of times, you get a few reports, and then you're like, nope, no good. And I say hour, minutes even. And Zap, which is Microsoft implementation of it, if you use Microsoft 365 and you have Zap activated, which you should, it will, when it learns that something was bad, it will go back in time and look at the emails that are already in your inbox. And if it finds it, it will delete it. So I think that's great. The problem with security software that is not sort of implemented in your email solution, let's say you use a MX redirection. So your email go to a software does its analysis, lets it through to your real email, like your Microsoft 365. Well, this software can't go back generally and delete it. So that's a little bit more limiting. The other thing that is done to sort of always check is links. So it will check a link when it comes in and say, yeah, all right, seems fine. But then when you click it, maybe an hour later, 2 hours later, the attackers have switched it from safe to completely borking your computer. So that's also check where they will redirect you the link and check it at the time that you click it. So it's those type of modern things that you want to make sure you have in your security solutions. If you want to go further, a SIM, a SOAR. So a SIM, security information and event management. It is basically a aggregation of all your logs and puts them together and allows you to have a holistic view and see, oh, my internet provider logs say this, or my ISP, my WAN say this, then my router says this, then this endpoint protection said this, and then you can see the whole route and sort of put things together. SOAR is basically the automation of that investigation. So it will do things automatically. Implement file integrity monitoring, another continuous monitoring and diagnosis tool. We're getting into compliance. Like if your clients don't have a compliant requirement, most likely they won't be ready to pay for that stuff, but it exists. Wanted to mention it. File integrity monitoring is we'll just check that files don't change. It'll take a signature and then check. Yeah, all right, everything's okay. 6, because Henry is gonna kill me if I go much longer.
No.
Authentication and authorization must be dynamic. Authentication and authorization have to be ongoing. Trust must be reevaluated continuously. So now we're getting sort of to come back over things that we've talked about. Must be achievable while maintaining trust and usability. So if you check every 4 seconds and ask somebody to like log back in every time they click something in an application, they just stop using the application or they'll find some way to cheat it. Your security has to be realistic and people have to get on board. And I'll mention training in a minute, but that's an important thing with any security implementation. How do you do that? The authentication authorization must be dynamic. Well, identity and access management is a minimum, MFA is a minimum, and then everything else that we've talked about sort of combines together to give you that. The idea, if you want to get fancy, because I want to mention the future, dynamically discredit devices, services, and resources that don't meet the latest security requirements. So we said access should be dynamic. This applies here. So you should tie your signal together from the one before where you're getting information about like, oh, this is out of date, or let's say your security, your vulnerability scanning. Who here has their, let's say, Nessus scan connected to discrediting those applications from accessing data? It doesn't happen very much. It's coming, but it's something to look into. Again, don't hesitate if you have questions. I don't think I see the question box, so maybe there are questions. But if they aren't, there should be.
There was a question, but we'll leave him till the end to answer them at this point.
No, that's fine. I just want to encourage people like not to just sit there passively. You should challenge that stuff. Also, I would love for people to add things to each of those tenets as a practical thing that they're like, oh, that's interesting. Here's what I will do. Last one, collect as much info as possible about current state. So every security plan generally focus on not having issues, and that's fine. But you have to work with the assumption that you'll have trouble eventually. There'll be some kind of attack. Even if you limit it, it's good, but it's bad. You need to have a clear view of current state of asset security posture, network traffic, and access requests to use to improve your security. So if you don't know what's going on, you will address fires, you will address hackings and crypto lockering and phishing and all that stuff, but you will not be able to progress over time You want to ensure auditing is enabled in all resources to a practical, usable level. So I'll give you an example. If you're not a Sherweb client, in Microsoft 365, the unified audit log, which is what they call their sort of general logs, is off by default. So if you just get Microsoft 365 for your client, or they got it themselves, which happened, maybe that's off. So the day that you want to know what happened and you want to verify, like, are we hacked or is this normal, or you show up and there's no logs, that's a very bad day for a service provider. Very, very bad. So you want to make sure you turn that on. That's true of your network devices, your everything, really. And that's where I say practical level, because turning everything on eventually run out of space. It's just too much information. You'll never look at it. So there is a balance to be kept between usability and logging, but it is like, ask yourself, your clients, they use, I don't know, Salesforce, and it's not directly under your responsibility. It's their CRM. It's how they manage business stuff, and they haven't given you control of it. Is logging enabled correctly in Salesforce? Like, have you checked? Same thing for AWS. AWS is an interesting beast when it comes to that. Azure as well, although Microsoft has done a lot to make it as easy as possible. Again, implement SIM, consider SOAR, same advice I gave for the advanced stuff. I think more and more that will become accessible. I think one of the ways that will become accessible is to deal with a managed service provider. So somebody like, for example, Sherweb could do the implementation of the SIM, the SOAR, like they could manage technology by, like, they pay for the licenses and everything, and you just get the sort of the result, the security nougat, without all the trouble. So that's something definitely to consider. So those are the 7 tenets. I think they give a pretty good eye on what's important when you're building zero trust. It's not a product. I name product, but I mostly name functions, which is more important. A couple of key points to make sure I put emphasis on before I leave. Well, before I switch over to Henry. Offering zero trust security is not a switch, but a journey. Like, it's not one product that you buy. It's not one shot. Even if you say we're implementing all of zero trust, you're probably not. I think it's better to do it step by step. The other thing, and it goes directly in relation to that, consider leveraging the cloud to implement zero trust. I mentioned using a service provider, using managed solution. Those are generally cloud. It's just, if you're gonna start somewhere with a lot less investment. Like, you can buy your own SIM, $20,000, $30,000 to get, I don't know, Alien Vault, and you can get going that way. It's kind of it's not necessary. You can get access to tooling. There's a number of free tools. A lot of the example I gave, and if you want access to the slides, it will be available. A lot of the example I gave of tools are free, stuff like Nmap, for sure. And then the last thing is, all the best technology and policies in the world won't solve the problem of bad behavior by the end user. It will help, like, it will limit the damage that dumb user like me can do, but it won't prevent it. So I think here, high-level checklist of things you should consider, and I'll start with the end user training. We'll talk about social engineering a lot today. There is 2 aspects. You should have ongoing user training and evaluation, not just training, but evaluation. You should check if people understand the training, or if they just go to the training and they go play the video, then they do something else, and then they go, okay, and then they're done. If strong users are, if everything else fails, you should have backups, which I didn't talk about a lot, and then well-educated users. Strong authentication, policy-based adaptive access, automation, and then data classification and protection are the main topics that you should cover. You can go very shallow in each or very deep. I mentioned the checklist. The assessment is a big part of it. Talk to your clients about what's important to them. Where is the value in their business? And then focus on that. Here's what's recommended by NIST to get started. I kind of like that list. It's a little bit high level. I like more practical, but certainly you can base yourself off of that and get pretty far. Identify the actors on the enterprise. People first. Again, I just mentioned it again. Then identify the assets owned by the enterprise, and it goes with the next thing, which is identify the key processes and the risk associated with each. Having all that and a focus on zero trust, you can build an initial plan and proposal. Change management is a big part of cybersecurity. For the love of God, make sure you involve the clients, the customers. They have a huge role to play, because if you unilaterally enable a bunch of security and you say, hey, it was the thing to do, you're now secure, prepare to roll back things, prepare to have new bad behaviors that you go facepalm, like, why are they doing that? They're doing that because they don't understand what you just did. You have to build your plan accordingly to what makes sense to your client or the company that you're securing. It is not a one-size-fits-all. You should take the time to understand the reality. Have a plan that is built that fit the reality, but not like, oh, I got all the information, let me go build that plan in my dark cave. Build it with them, implementation plan with them, and then you can go to initial deployment and monitoring. Then you can expand. We talked about making sure you have a good view of your current security posture and everything, and then you can expand and improve it. You'll know where to focus. What it could look like, because again, I like to make it as practical as possible. Here's a list of tasks that are all affiliated with having a good security plan, cybersecurity in general, and then having it as ZTA, zero trust, as possible. I won't list everything. I've bold everything that's available at Sherweb, so you can see most of the categories are covered by things that we offer. Ask us questions, come and see us, see what we can do for you. We'll have more and more information around building that zero trust centric offer. Speaking of which, here's how Sherweb can help.
Right. And here comes the marketing guy to explain that stuff. So, okay, here we go. So this past year, Sherweb's actually invested quite a few resources into building out its already strong library of materials and tools for you, the partner, or you, the soon-to-be partner, to actually be able to better position and sell, and even open a conversation about cybersecurity with your clients or your prospects. And one of the key capstones of all this is what we're calling the Security Foundation Program. So what it is at its core, it's a combination of security posture assessment tool alongside with consultations that we provide to you in order to understand where your security posture is for yourselves, but specifically for your customers, and then how you can actually improve your security offering. So to that end, this is we're calling this the Security Foundation Program, and it has, as I say, it has an online assessment, security posture assessment. It also comes in a flavor of PDF form for you to just get your feet wet to understand what it actually is. And the assessment itself, it's a 15-question assessment, but despite its short length, we've actually managed to cover all the 5 NIST cybersecurity categories, right? So identify, detect, protect, recover, and respond. They're all covered in this, and obviously we're making no claim that this is an in-depth assessment, but it's enough to get you started to understand just where you are overall with respect to the security posture you have for your customer or your prospect therein. And importantly, it's not just an assessment. We also give you, once you've actually done this, in the online version that is, a full report of the threats and vulnerabilities that are inherent to the setup you have, and some very detailed recommendations. Now, I'm just talking here and not demoing it because we've already done a couple of webinars, which you can actually get on demand to see it, but better yet, I really highly recommend you just get started at assessment.sherweb.com. There's a completely free security posture assessment tool that has absolutely no obligations whatsoever. Please go and check it out. And
it mentions it here, but it's built on NIST, which we mentioned already, and CIS. CIS is another good neutral organization that has it's a set of controls. It's very, very interesting if you have the time to invest. If you don't, this assessment is terrific, much easier to get started with and everything. But if you're just in the mood to consume more security information and standards that you can apply, CIS is another very good source.
Absolutely. So yeah, so there's so this is, as I said, we've already done a presentation and demo of this, so I'm not going to go over it again, but just to show you very quickly, every question in this is well, it's easy to understand, but it will also give context directly in the question as you're going through. And so, for example, if you actually do this assessment with one of your prospects, for example, they'll actually be able to see why it is that question is being asked. And at the end of all that, as I say on the graphic we have here, you get a very detailed, long report of all the various threats and vulnerabilities that might actually have been uncovered by this particular assessment. Now, I did mention this is just 15 short questions. However, the good news is, and this is coming out at the end of this month or at the latest, the beginning of next month, we're actually, we've expanded this and we're hard at work at building a white label version of this tool for you to use with your customers or your prospects. So you'll be able to take a huge bank of questions. We're currently up to over 50 questions, and we're always going to be improving on this. You'll be able to take these questions and build the assessment that you actually think will make sense for the conversation you want to have with your customers. And then, Bob's your uncle. You can actually do the assessment and you'll get the report, and you can customize it with your colors and your company logo to make it, well, you can erase us completely from the equation in this conversation if you so please. And it's still all free. It's completely 100% free to our partners. All you have to do, as I say, become a partner. And if you already are, the moment it's ready, we will be letting you know, and we'll be inviting you all to check it out. Beyond all that, we have a number of other sales enablement tools and programs for you. So obviously, our pre-sales support, we have pre-sales engineers that can actually help you navigate the ins and outs of how to improve the offer you already have, or if you don't have one, how to build a good offer that you can actually bring to your customers, right? We've got an MDF, a marketing development funds program, to help our interested partners who just need that extra kick to help position and market themselves. Very, very happy to open that program up to partners. We have a not for resale program, because we really think here at Sherweb, it's key that before you actually use something or sell something, you should understand the ins and outs of that particular solution or product. So with this not for resale program, we offer you our products either for free or at steep discounts, so you can actually test it out and try to break these solutions, security solutions for yourselves before you actually go and provide it, provision it for your customers, or build a bundle or offer off of it. And last but definitely not least, we've secured, for again, partners only and for free, we've gotten training content from CompTIA as well as our various security product providers for you, the partner, to become better educated on all these various solutions. And the CompTIA course in particular, it's interesting because it gives a very good overview on the basics of cybersecurity, as well as a good amount of content on how to approach that conversation and how to approach prospects in your attempts to become a managed service provider. So all of that, and it's all this stuff, it's free to you, the partner. And if you're not a partner, I highly invite you to become a partner today at sherweb.com/partners, or just contact us directly. And the phone number is right here, and we'll make it available for you guys again at the end of all this. I believe so. There's a quick thing in line with us trying to provide value and to help partners along. Accelerate this year is virtual, and what it is, well, obviously it's a pandemic. Accelerate this year is virtual, and we're here to provide you all, everyone who registers, with good, solid courses and education sessions. I believe Guillaume has more to say on that.
On Accelerate? I have a lot to say on Accelerate, but we're pretty pressed for time.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that we split it in a few stages this year, because since it's virtual, instead of just, I think everybody's just been trying to turn their physical conference to a virtual conference and make it as much the same as possible. We went a completely different way. We thought, well, this virtual thing really gives us more flexibility. So it is in 3 separate sessions. We're giving you the ability to do much more. Basically, the first session is an MBA for MSP. It's the one I'll mention. We're going to help you. I want to say this very respectfully. The idea is we'll work together with you and provide you as much information as possible on how to modernize your MSP practice. it will come from us, but mostly it will come from domain experts. So we have external people that will come and help you through different workshop and everything to sort of modernize your security practice. I think we'll need to modernize Henry's internet connection, but that's a different conversation. And then a little bit later, then we'll help you to build that business plan using those modern practices and everything. And then the step 3, which doesn't have a firm date just yet, is we'll help you with the execution. It's exciting. It's a completely new model. We invite you to join completely free for our partners. So get involved. I think I would definitely have a look, and then you can tell us if this new idea was a good idea. I think it is, but you tell us.
Yep.
I'm getting the link. So all of that being said, it's time to go to our first guest. I'm very excited to have Seth from CompTIA join us. CompTIA is a wonderful organization. Maybe Seth, you'll be able to say a few more intelligent word about it than I can, but we've worked with CompTIA since forever. People that have worked with Sherweb have worked at CompTIA and vice versa. And it's a nonprofit focused exclusively on MSPs and partners, which make them such a neutral group that's just there to help you. And I think that's the key difference with everybody else. Like Sherweb, I feel, has really good advice, and other vendors have good advice, and everybody's trying to help. But CompTIA is one of the few really unbiased group that can help you and help bring you further. So without further ado, Seth, thanks for joining us, and have fun.
There we go. Thanks for having me. And yeah, thanks for the kind words about CompTIA. Just to reiterate what you said there, we are a nonprofit trade association for the IT industry. There's a lot of things that we do under that umbrella, but I think specifically for the people on this call, we have a membership organization that is open to companies within the IT industry. And we focus a lot on the relationships between vendors and partners, the dynamics of running an MSP, technology trends that are happening that are affecting all of your businesses. We have a lot of communities set up to discuss those things in a vendor neutral, open way. So if you're not familiar with CompTIA, I would encourage you to check us out and take advantage of our offerings there. I'm part of the research team with CompTIA. That's another thing that we have under the umbrella. The research serves all of CompTIA's interests, and I focus on technology trends. I'm actually wrapping up a study on cybersecurity, and so a lot of the data that I'm going to be sharing today is a sneak peek of the data that's going to be coming out in the next couple weeks in our new security study. And you might see the numbers wiggle a little bit as they get finalized for the study, but all of the trends that I'm talking about definitely hold true. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I really appreciated hearing Guillaume and Henry walk through some of the specifics on Zero Trust and exactly how that gets implemented. I think my presentation is going to maybe step back and go up a level and provide some more context. And I think that the reason that that's helpful is so many people today in the technology space are having to make the technology more relevant to business interests. Instead of just having it be a support function, or instead of just having security as a nice to have that's protecting assets, there has to be an actual tie to the objectives of the business. And so technology professionals are having to have conversations with business professionals, with business unit managers, with business owners and CEOs, and make the technology relevant to where they want to go with the business. And so I think that having the context is really helpful for that. That's me, my information there. So I'm going to start off with the state of cybersecurity. This is the way that we're rebranding our security studies for this year and moving forward. And so we also kind of took a step back and tried to look at a high level of what's going on in the field of cybersecurity. And the first thing that we found is that even though cybersecurity is a difficult field, even though it's very complex, and there's been a lot of recent activity with COVID-19, people are generally feeling like it's not hopeless, like, that there's positive momentum, that the overall situation in cybersecurity is improving, whether that's improving dramatically or improving slightly. And so I think that's a positive thing, because for the past 5 years or so, there's been a lot of change in the field of cybersecurity. And I think a lot of companies have struggled to kind of understand exactly what modern cybersecurity looks like. And I think that we can see in our data for this year that companies aren't feeling like they're floundering. They're moving forward, and they feel like they're able to build a plan for the future. Now you can see that their overall view on cybersecurity is probably tightly correlated with the satisfaction they have with their own company's security posture. These numbers are tracking pretty similar here. And so when we look at the overall view on cybersecurity, we say that's a pretty good thing. Companies are generally feeling positive. And then when we look at the satisfaction with individual security postures, I think the tendency is to think that that's a good thing also, that, we've got, over 70% of the people that are feeling satisfied with their company's security posture. But I think this one bears a little bit of a closer look, because part of the shift that we've had over these past 5 years is that cybersecurity is not just a piece of IT operations anymore. It's not just a part of what happens within the infrastructure team. Cybersecurity is becoming its own discipline. And part of the reason that it's becoming its own discipline is because it's so critical to business success and in some cases, business survival. So if you were to equate cybersecurity to another business critical function like finance and ask people, how do you feel, what's your satisfaction level with your company's financial posture? And you got these kind of numbers out where only 29% said that they were completely satisfied. I think that we would feel then that there's actually quite a bit of room for improvement. And so that's how we tend to look at this number, that people are feeling good. They feel like there's some satisfaction there, but they may be underestimating the importance that cybersecurity has to their future efforts. So looking at the issues that people see when they're thinking about cybersecurity, either out in the industry or specifically with how they're dealing with it at their company, you can see that 3 out of the top 4 concerns here have to do with the attack landscape. You've got a much wider variety of attacks that have to be guarded against. The volume of attacks is growing as the number of cyber criminals is growing rapidly. And the scale of potential attacks, meaning that the impact that it can have on the business, has grown dramatically as well. So people look out there and they see all of these attacks coming, and there's much more of them than there used to be, and they can have a much wider impact, and that gives them cause for concern. The other one that's lingering in the top 4 there is privacy concerns, and we've been watching privacy for the past few years. And I think privacy has taken some interesting turns here, that it started out as something that people absolutely had to have. You had to guard against. You have to make sure that you're keeping information private, and that gives it a very close tie to security. But it's become more complicated, especially for those companies that are offering services based on the information that they're collecting. Personalized services or services that rely on the data. Well, you have to use the data in some way then. And I think especially in the B2C space, in the consumer space, this has become a very complicated debate, where consumers might say as a knee-jerk reaction that they want privacy. But in the same breath, they're going to say that they want all of these wonderful and sometimes free services as well. So I think there's some real threads there to be pulled, and a lot of unraveling to be done in that space. It's not quite as complicated in the B2B world, but I think the same tone still applies, and you have to really look at it closely and determine how much privacy can we offer, but still get the data that we need, and then use that data in order to improve our relationships or our services or whatever it might be. So I think privacy is one that people are going to wrestle with in the coming years. And then you can see, in the bottom there's a handful of other issues that companies are dealing with as they're trying to figure out what this new approach to security looks like. So this data, I think, has turned out very interesting when we're talking about the challenges in improving cybersecurity. And when I say that it's interesting, what I mean is the top challenges on this chart are kind of top-down problems, and the bottom challenges on this chart are more of bottoms-up problems. So the top-down problems come from the top layer of the organization maybe not understanding the cybersecurity situation as well as they should. So you've got this belief that current security is good enough. That ties back to that original chart with the satisfaction. And when we look at the satisfaction with company security posture and we break it down by job title, we see that executives tend to have a much rosier view of their cybersecurity posture than either business staff or IT staff. So again, you've got executives that are thinking maybe we haven't been breached in a while, or we don't know if we've been breached. You know, everything seems to be good. No news is good news. Everything must be good enough. And if they're actually able to peel back the covers and look under it and do some kind of proactive assessment of their security posture, they might not feel quite the same way. But that comes from the top, is this belief that security is good enough. And then if they're feeling like security is good enough and they're wanting to get into other technology, then they're putting a higher priority on investments in those technology without the corresponding investment in the security that needs to go with that technology. And that goes right into the lack of budget. So I think all of those come from the top down. And when we talk with security SMEs that come in and help us with our certifications, or security specialists that are within our membership communities, we hear this a lot, you know, that the business owners might not understand exactly how fragile their security posture actually is. And so to improve that, you've got these 4 issues on the bottom that, again, kind of come from the bottom up. So what exactly can a security team do, or what can a security partner do in order to combat some of these beliefs that might be held by the executive level? Metrics is something that we'll probably talk about a couple times in the presentation here. There didn't used to be a lot of metrics around security. It was either have we been breached or not. And now that companies are recognizing that you can't always tell if you've been breached, that might not be a sufficient measurement, there are a range of other metrics that are being put to use. And security professionals have to understand how to quantify the security effort and how to define success. And there's a large educational component. And then you can see at the bottom, there's uncertainty in how to use a third party here. So if you are a partner coming in and helping a client that either does or does not have their own security team, I think you have to be able to have that conversation of what you're bringing to the table and exactly how that's helping the business and how you're going to work with whatever internal professionals there may be. Helping the IT team communicate that up to the business is becoming more and more important. So with all of that happening, you know, companies are changing their approach to security. And this is a topic that we've looked at for several years here. And in terms of drivers for the new approach, it's no surprise to see that the most recent data is saying that the shift to remote workforce is changing the security approach. And so you've got this shift to remote workforce. And then in terms of the new approach, you can see that the second most common element of a new approach would be a focus on employee education. So those two things really go hand in hand. But before this year, the one that we always saw on the top was the change in IT operations. And what we used to say is, okay, clearly a change in IT operations should be changing your security approach in some way. But if only 42% of companies are saying that that's been a driver for them, there are clearly more than 42% of the companies out there that have changed their IT approach in the past several years, whether that's a move to cloud computing, whether it's growing their mobile device ecosystem, whatever it's been, there have been some significant shifts in IT operations, and you would expect to see significant changes in the security approach as well. And we haven't really seen that up to this point. And again, the COVID pandemic and the shift to remote workforce can maybe act as a tipping point or an accelerant for that a lot of companies definitely understand that they have to do something new with security now that everyone's working at home. And we're really encouraging companies to combine those two things together to say, yes, we have some tactical things that we have to do for our remote workforce, but we should continue down that path into more strategic things that we have to do because we're trying to be more cloud-based, because we have more mobile devices, because we're using artificial intelligence, whatever it might be. There are a lot of vulnerabilities that companies probably have, and you can get into those vulnerabilities as part of a conversation around what are we doing around our workforce. So that change in IT operations, one of the biggest things that it would drive on the right-hand side would be a more diverse set of technology tools. The technology tools used to mostly be firewall and antivirus, and now there's a range of other tools that some of which got mentioned in the previous presentation, and I'll touch on a couple as well. Those are the big two in terms of what drives a security approach. The others, they all play a part depending on how much the company might be participating in something like training their professionals and getting some new knowledge of the landscape, or shifting their focus to a new industry vertical. In terms of how that's changing the approach, we definitely see a higher priority on incident response. Companies are recognizing that it's not so much if you get breached, but when, and when you get breached, what are you going to do about it? And so they're really emphasizing incident response there. We definitely see a shift to more proactive measures. It's not just a defensive mindset anymore, but companies realize that they have to proactively test their own security systems and make sure that there are no vulnerabilities there. And two that we are really focusing on in the upcoming research are process improvements and specialized or dedicated resources to security. So yeah, I'd encourage you to check on our website for that research in a couple of weeks and see what the data is saying around those two areas. So all of this leads to something that Henry mentioned in the last presentation, that one of the major reasons that we've had a security shift in the past few years has been this notion of the secure perimeter. And Henry even mentioned a castle, and so I'm providing a visual here for the castle that he mentioned. This is how people used to think about security: is let's build the walls, let's build a moat, let's only have one access point, let's very tightly control anything that gets in and out, and let's assume that everything that's happening on the inside is safe and secure and protected from the outside. We've obviously moved to a situation where that's not the case, and just like Henry was saying, I think most of the focus when we talk about the deterioration of the secure perimeter, most of the focus tends to be on the fact that companies are now moving activities outside of that perimeter. They're moving to a cloud provider, would be the prime example there. But the more subtle piece of the secure perimeter is you can't necessarily trust what's on the inside. You can't assume that everything that's on the inside is good. And that's what's really leading to this zero trust framework, or a zero trust approach. And we've advocated several different pieces of a new mindset around security over the past few years. We've talked about the expanded technology toolbox, we've talked about new processes, and we've talked about educating the workforce. And different components of all of those things are really finding a home in a zero trust approach. So we agree with Sherweb. We are thinking that the zero trust approach and the zero trust framework is going to be a good umbrella term for all of the different changes that are happening in security these days. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a zero trust framework. Again, not so much from the tactical level that Henry and Guillaume went through, but more of a business level and understanding the big pieces, so that if you're trying to change hearts and minds in a business, especially at that executive level, these are some of the components that you can talk about that didn't used to be part of a traditional security approach, but now they're coming in. Before we get into those four, I'll just highlight that zero trust, as shown by our recent data here, is certainly not a common practice yet. We've got all of these other common practices, which again, all of these others are a little bit more granular. None of them are really the comprehensive framework that zero trust would be. And you can see that some of them have gained some good momentum. So monitoring and analytics, workforce education are two things that we've been preaching for quite a while. And we definitely see companies picking those up. And then you've got a laundry list of other things that happen here, but really, just like they described in the previous presentation, the way of thinking about all of these things is through the lens of a zero trust framework. And so we're really expecting more and more companies over the next few years to adopt that and to embrace that mindset within their organization. So the first thing that I would mention is risk analysis. I think all of these actually got mentioned in the previous presentation, but again, I'm just going to kind of wrap them up in a different way here. So risk analysis is something that companies didn't used to do a whole lot of because they didn't feel like they needed to. Again, with a secure perimeter, their idea was, let's build the walls, and then whatever we want to protect, we're just going to throw inside the wall. And we don't really have to figure out how much we need to protect it or how critical it is that it have tight security. Everything's just going to go inside of the secure perimeter, and we don't have to think about it. And that's not the case anymore. The costs of securing applications and data are tied to each application, each data set, each system. You're having to do security on a kind of a case-by-case basis. And so to give every application or every piece of data the highest level of security very quickly becomes cost prohibitive. So companies are forced into a much more formal risk analysis process. And going through and understanding from the business units, what is this data used for? How is this system used in day-to-day operations? And then how much security do we need to put on top of it? Companies have been going through this for the past few years. It's been a large part of the move into cloud providers, but especially at the SMB level, this is a practice that is somewhat unfamiliar and that people wouldn't necessarily have the skills to go through. So a lot of smaller companies are probably looking for help to guide them through this process. They don't quite know exactly how to assess which of their systems are critical and what to do about it. They could use some guidance there. So risk analysis is the first component of zero trust, so that you can understand exactly what your architecture looks like before you start taking the next step. The next step is typically data protection, and we tend to use the term data protection, but it could also be application level security or whatever. But we tend to use data protection because we are now trying to protect the actual data rather than just put the data into a safe place. So again, data is moving into cloud providers. Data is being used on mobile devices. Data is being shared much more commonly and openly with other people in your business ecosystem. And so the data itself has to get looked at very closely. And one of the tools here that's made great strides in the past few years is DLP, or data loss protection, data loss prevention, kind of falls under the same terms there. And companies have to use these tools to protect their data in various stages, whether that's data at rest, just sitting waiting to be used, or whether it's being used and you're looking at the way it's being used and the device that it might be getting used on, or data that's being transmitted. And again, the shift to remote work has put a lot more burden on that transmission and the way that employees are accessing their corporate systems. But all three of those areas need to get examined. And that's not something that used to happen in a more traditional mindset. You just always assumed that all of the data was safe and all of the activities using the data were happening in that safe and secure perimeter. So companies are having to shift a lot more to data protection. And this often starts with an audit. Companies don't really know, just like they don't know exactly how to classify their systems. They don't know exactly where their data is, and they especially don't know where it's going and how it travels. So I know a lot of MSSPs or security partners will often perform audits of networks and just put monitoring on those networks for their clients and kind of have that on there for a week and then come in and say, let us show you now what's happening with your data. And now you can understand it better. And typically when clients see that, not only do they understand it better, but they definitely understand the need for protection. They understand that they need to do something different there. So data protection and DLP is becoming a key part of how to approach things with a zero trust mindset. The third piece here is identity management. This one definitely got mentioned as well. And this is kind of flipping the data problem on its head. So, if data is leaving the secure perimeter, if it's going all over the place, then you now have to think differently about how people are coming in. And I think at the first level, it's gone from just a binary thing that, like, if you can get in the front door, then you can do all the things. Now companies are getting, again, much more granular and saying, okay, you can get in the front door, but you can't have access to every single area here, every single system. We're handling that on a much more granular level. And so you've got a tool like identity and access management, IAM tools are out there. And companies are employing those a lot more as they have their users moving around between on-prem systems and cloud systems, as they're accessing different things. And again, this definitely falls into a zero trust mindset, that just because someone got in the front door, that doesn't mean that they should be able to access any part of what's inside. There should maybe be another layer there of verification. And so thinking about identity in a new way is been a key part of changing security over the past few years. And I think it's one of the more difficult parts for companies to grasp, because they're not used to tracking that movement, even less so than they are with the data. So I think that helping people understand that tracking identity and verifying identity is a key activity that needs to happen on an ongoing basis is the first big step into understanding what the level of investment needs to be in order to do that properly. And the last big piece of zero trust is continuous monitoring. So this is very different from, I think, the traditional mindset of security, which was maybe a little bit more set it and forget it. So, we're going to set our firewall up, we're going to configure it, and then unless something bad happens, we are going to assume that it's doing its job. That's really no longer the case, and most security professionals recognize that can't be the way that they would operate, and so there's a lot more monitoring happening, and SIM tools, SIEM, security information and event monitoring. That's a good way of pulling all the types of monitoring together into a dashboard or a view that people can see all at once what's happening there. Now the complication is, even if you pull all of that in and you're looking at it, there's a lot happening in the security space these days, and it's quickly becoming more complex than the current teams can handle, and the complexity is growing faster than the teams are growing. So this is also an area where artificial intelligence and machine learning are really playing in. That part of this monitoring is establishing patterns for what should be the expected behavior, and then you've got tools and algorithms that are helping watch that and flagging anything anomalous. Now, the issue with artificial intelligence, to take a side detour into that technology, is I think people want that technology to be set it and forget it as well. That they're viewing artificial intelligence the way that they used to view their other software, that you give it certain inputs and it's going to perform, and then you get certain outputs. And that's not the way that machine learning works. Machine learning works a little bit more on probability. So it takes a huge number of inputs, and it looks for correlations, it looks for patterns, it looks at past history, and it gives its best guess of what is happening. So those guesses sometimes can produce results that are really good and really non-intuitive, and things that people wouldn't have seen if they were looking at it themselves. But sometimes they can be a little off base. And so artificial intelligence requires its own level of oversight and monitoring. And so it can definitely be a tool here to help reduce some of the complexity and to help cut through some of that. But it's not going to solve the problem all on its own. And I think companies that are using those types of algorithms really have to understand what type of skill they need in overseeing the tool, and making sure that the tool isn't going off in a direction that's unintended. So all of that is great. All of these tools are wonderful, but like Guillaume said, all of the tools in the world aren't going to solve the problem of the end user doing something that you can't predict or that you don't desire. So I'm going to take a slight left turn here, into the human element of this, because I think that all of our SMEs, again, all of the people in the security community regularly will say that the human element is the weakest link in the security chain, and trying to strengthen that, trying to improve that is the biggest challenge, because again, you can't always solve it with technology. You have to solve it in some other way. So to just scope out the problem here, the data point that you see on the right is our data point. It's one that we've collected for several years in a row, and actually we don't look at it as much anymore because it really hasn't changed that much. We consistently see that companies feel that human error is the leading cause of failure when it comes to assessing their breaches. That some problem has happened, and we'll look at the types of problems in a minute. But this quote here comes from Joe Payne, president and CEO at Code 42. And this was something that he said kind of in the run-up to the RSA conference this year. Last year, 2/3 of all breaches were caused by insiders, yet 90% of security budget dollars are focused on hackers, phishing, nation states, and external forces, all the things on the outside. We need to address the elephant in the room. Insiders may be our biggest risk. And again, he's probably being generous there. He probably knows that insiders are the biggest risk. And again, this isn't malicious behavior all of the time. Sometimes it can be, but more and more people are using technology. Companies are able to distribute technology to employees that would have never used it before, whether they're on a manufacturing floor or out in the field or doing something that typically wouldn't have really worked for the technology that we had at the time. They're now able to use mobile technology much more. Everything is much more connected. IoT is making its way in. And so there's so much more technology and so many more people using it that you now have a much greater concern about the way that they're using it. And so when we ask companies, okay, human error is the biggest problem, but what types of human error are you seeing? Again, you can see here on the top that it's not malicious in most cases. You've got end users who just don't understand what the policies and procedures might be, that they're failing to follow the policies and procedures. Maybe sometimes they're going around them willfully, but in many cases they might not be. And that's where you get to the second one, just general carelessness. People not being careful with their devices if they're out in public, or people not being careful of how they're connecting. People not being careful with the systems that they're accessing, or maybe the systems that they're procuring. We've seen a lot of business units that do a lot more procurement of their own technology these days. And one of the things that they really fail to understand is the security implications, because they're mostly focused on the feature set. Failure to get up to speed on new threats starts to get into the technology team a little bit. And then the lack of expertise could apply either to the technology team or to those business units that are procuring their own technology. And then finally, you have the technical team failing to follow policies and procedures. So that's on the bottom. And again, maybe they're just trying to get their job done or whatever, but that's not the leading cause of human error for a lot of companies. So there are two big buckets to consider here, the general workforce and then the technology team. And the way to address the general workforce is primarily through education. So security awareness training and security education has really transformed a lot in the past few years. A lot of companies used to do maybe a simple annual security audit and just say, please read this, and then sign that you read it, and we're good to go. And I think that the impact of security and the complexity of security these days is showing companies that that's just not going to be good enough. And so they're looking for better things in their security training. The top thing that they're looking for is better content. They want it to be relevant, certainly relevant to the times and to the most common threats that are out there, but in some cases relevant to the job role. So rather than just blasting the same security training out to everyone in the company, some companies are getting much more directed with it, and they're trying to tailor the training for the job role so that people have even a better idea of what to look out for, whether that would be a phishing attack or unexpected behavior or whatever it might be. They're trying to tailor that content, and so companies obviously are focused on better content here. And I won't go through the rest of these, but you can see that there are a number of things that companies are looking for that would indicate that this is not a simple security education package. This is an ongoing, relatively robust program that they're looking to implement. And in many cases, they're looking to the technical team, whether that's their internal specialists or a third party, to provide that training. And education might not be the core competency for those groups, but they're being forced into that role. So education and communicating clearly what the security issues are is really becoming a key component of performing security these days. And if that covers the general workforce, then the piece that would cover the technical team is obviously upskilling and improving skills. And you can see here, again, I won't go through all of these, but there's a long laundry list on the left-hand side of the types of skills that companies are looking for. It is kind of interesting. You can see the one that made its way to the top in terms of significant improvement needed is educational ability. They're looking for the security team to be better about educating, whether that's educating the workforce on just awareness or whether that's educating up the chain to understand what level of investment would be appropriate. There's a wide variety of things here, and you can see that the level of complexity here and the type of specialization that's needed is typically going to be more than anyone except the largest companies can really handle on their own. So most companies are going to start looking for partnering in order to build a full and comprehensive security posture. So their internal team might be more focused on the infrastructure, but they need someone to come in and help them with compliance. They need someone to come in and help them with this formal risk assessment. Maybe they need someone to come and help them with the proactive pieces. And that kind of leads into the final data point there on the right-hand side, that there's been a major shift here in the way that skills are built and in the way that companies are approaching things, that it's not just defensive. We're not just trying to keep everything out anymore, but now it's proactive. And you can see that a good number of companies feel like they have a balance between these two. But actually, a lot of people are thinking that the world is heading into a direction where most companies need to be more proactive than even having a 50-50 split. And so that group at the bottom, the 28%, would be the ones kind of on the cutting edge, and we're hoping to see that grow over time. So I think that's a quick overview from me. Again, the report will be out in a couple weeks, and I'm not sure exactly how we're doing on time or what we want the next phase to be, but I wanted to try to leave some time for questions at the end if we have any.
So thank you very much, Seth. That was very informative. I find it comforting that a lot of the things that we both said seem to align very well and are sort of pushing the same buttons. We are monitoring the very dark in here all of a sudden. We are monitoring the questions and everything. We will sort of put those together. Talisa, I don't know if there's any of the questions we wanted to address right now, Talisa or Henry.
And I know we've got a panel at the end of the day for more questions. Yep. So,
Henry, we can't hear you for now. Thanks, Rachel. That was very, very interesting and hopefully a little scary for most people.
Just a bit.
I think it's part of it. I've had to convince people to invest a little bit in security for a long time, and you try to stay away from fear as the main mechanism because it feels a little cheap, but at the same time, it is what it is. Like it is, if you're not scared at all, then I understand why you don't want to invest. So thank you very much for your presentation. It was very enlightening. I hope everybody enjoyed it. What's left of today's seminar is the panel. So we've invited everybody back in. Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Henry and Rachel, for sticking around.
Of course.
I have some prepared questions here. Some of them are stuff that we put together before today, and then some of them are directly from our audience today as well. Rachel, I'll give you a little bit of a break and start with Seth.
Right.
Obviously, everybody can intervene on everybody else's questions. Don't hesitate. The idea is to have a little bit of a conversation. For the people in the audience, if you have further question that comes from those conversations, don't hesitate at all. I think you've sort of answered it from your presentation, but can you talk, Seth, about do you feel, or is the data showing that people are taking security more seriously now than they did a year ago? Oh, can't hear you.
There we go. I would say I think there's maybe two sides to that, right? Like I think that companies have been taking security seriously for a while. Like they've been giving security a high priority for a while. They've said security is top of mind for us. You know, we need to do something about it. I think the problem has been that they don't know what to do about it. So I don't think that it's a higher priority, but I do think that they are really digging in more to figure out what they should do about it and figuring out the best practices, you know, again, moving towards the zero trust framework that we've been talking about all day. I think that's what we see. You know, I'm interested to know if all of you, you know, are kind of seeing the same thing or feel similarly.
If I can add something to that, would be that chaos is sometimes a good agent for change. Certainly everybody meant well. I don't think anybody like was willfully negligent with security. I don't think people are going, I know we're like putting at risk our old company, but I want to do it anyway. It's fun, like thrill seeker. But I think something like COVID and a change in reality and how everybody operates and everything just, and you mentioned it, brought that opportunity for IT and companies to sort of sneak a few security items like into action and give it some visibility. So you say, hey, you want to give everybody the mean to work from home. Here's what we need to do. And I think some of those items for most people were around security. So I would tend to agree. I think the one of the positive aspect, I don't want to paint it into a rosy of a picture, but one of the positive aspects of the last year was an increased focus on cybersecurity.
I would agree. And I would say that a lot of folks have always known how important security was, but things like COVID-19, working from home, and even the Twitter hack have really shocked people into action. Things that they were trying to get budget for before, or, you know, trying to change processes that were in effect that just were not effective at preventing social engineering. Things like not using two-person sign-off for sensitive account transfer changes or email changes, like in the case of the social engineering Twitter hack, where an individual pretended to be IT support and called people in customer support to do account takeover, which we all saw happen to Elon Musk, et cetera. We know that a lot of folks, people have been very vocal about the fact that they've been trying to get that type of two-person sign-off, auditing of access, all of these things in place for years, but people were slow moving, right? They felt like, we'll do it later and we'll push it off. But these types of things are a forcing function, and they really show you how dangerous social engineering can be and how widespread it really is.
Yeah, I think it's like I said in my presentation, I think the trickiest part over the past few years has been changing hearts and minds at like the business level, the executive level. I think security professionals have known for a while, here's what we need to be doing, you know, all these things. And the executives are saying like, why is just firewall not good enough anymore? And they haven't been able to speak the same language, and I think they're finally getting there.
Definitely.
Any advice on how to bring it up to the executives? Like how, like anything that came up as being consistently successful to drive a little bit of that consciousness?
I think, like Rachel said, the ongoing stories in the news and in the media are beginning to convince people, you know, okay, it's not just Target, you know, which was kind of the original one that seemed to kind of start this whole mega breach thing. You know, it's not just Target, it's not just Home Depot, it's not just, you know, the big insurance companies. it's everywhere. It's happening all the time. It's not just a one-off thing. So I think that has helped. And then the other big thing is metrics. Like, all of these, business executives run on numbers, right? And so security professionals, I think, have gotten better at, instead of saying like, well, we're not having any security breaches and that's a good thing. It's like, here's what we're doing. We're doing this and this and this and this and this. And that all leads to like this much better, security. And here's the potential impact if we didn't do those things. Like, a lot of people have been asking us, what's the average cost of a security breach? And those numbers are out there from Ponemon and IBM and a bunch of other people. And I mean, those numbers add up pretty quick, right? Especially for an SMB. SMB looks at that and they just can't do it. So security pros are able to say, here's the cost, and here are the metrics that are showing we're successful.
One of the stats I've seen that usually is interesting in a small medium business conversation, it's true of every company, but is you said like the cost of it, but I think one of the interesting one, very factual, is that I don't know if it was from CompTIA, it possibly was from CompTIA, is how many company don't recover ever from a major breach. Like, it's the end of the company. And I think if we can if people can see that, you don't have to convince them or anything, it's a fact. So if we can get executive to understand that, I'm without taking too much time, because I want to hear from you guys, but one thing that I try to sneak into every conversation with MSP is that you're fighting to get into business strategic conversation anyway with your clients. And I say use security as a Trojan horse to get there, because say, hey, we got to do a security assessment, as everybody should do. I think that's the constant thing we talked about in Zero Trust. You have to constantly evaluate your posture. And the first question for me in a security assessment is, what's valuable? Like, what is valuable in our company? And that's what we need to secure. So the conversation of what's valuable is always has to be strategic, is what the business does, what the business will do next, and everything. So that's what I recommend. Question from the audience, and I'm kind of curious when I read it, is for you, Rachel. I don't know if they're genuinely curious or they're working on their social engineering attack with you. They want to know if you use a password manager, and which one do you personally use?
I love that question. I don't talk about the software that I use on my machines like that, but I can definitely say there are great password managers out there that you can use. If you're extra politely paranoid, you probably want to use one that does not connect to the internet, or do some sort of salting of your passwords. I can tell you that that's something that I definitely recommend. That way, if your password manager is ever breached and you're ultra paranoid like I am, people won't be able to gain access to your password manager and the passwords within there. Hopefully they're encrypted and it's not a problem, but I try and protect myself so that no matter what happens, it's not going to be an issue. So pick a 6-digit thing, put it at the beginning or the end, right? And people aren't going to know what that is. They won't be able to get in.
Yeah, that's good. I figured we wouldn't get to find out, but I asked. It was a question from the audience. I think it was a good one.
Oh, we didn't use social engineering to try to pry our way into her confidence, right? We didn't apply it.
Yeah, the person didn't say which one they use and why they need to know quickly.
Yeah, see, that would have been a good idea. Use reciprocity. Tell me what you use in the comment, then maybe I would have brought it up. I probably still wouldn't have.
So Rachel, I personally don't use password manager, and I think I should. Do you have any recommendations?
That's good, Henry. You still should probably name what you use, but just give me a false piece of information. We'll get there, and soon you'll be hacking me in no time.
Yes. I would go with, I use Brand Z, and Brand Z is going out of business, so I need one quickly. Let me know what you use.
I like it. I like
it. There's a progression.
Yeah. Well, that's it. You learn, you get better. That's the idea. We mentioned at the very beginning of the day, security is a journey. So every step is good. Information, tools, people. It's all a big layer.
I'll say on a serious note, just generically, when I started using a password manager, there's a practice to it. Like, it takes some getting used to, and there are little wrinkles in it, like when you're trying to set everything up, kind of, like Rachel was saying. But like, for anyone out there that is thinking of jumping into it, be prepared for a little bit of a learning curve, and really figure out how this thing is working and how you can make it work for you.
Yeah, and you don't have to transfer all of your passwords like in the same sitting. I know a lot of people, when they're starting out on their password managers, they're like, Okay, well, I have to set aside 6 hours because it's going to take me forever. Start with your bank, your Gmail, and your social media accounts that you use every day. After that, you can move on to your airlines, your hotels, right? So you can kind of segment out what's most essential first.
Question for you, Seth, and I like this one. It's a good one because it's tough. How are companies measuring success in cybersecurity? So we've talked about it being a journey, and it's not black and white whether you have security or not, and you can't do everything at once. So I guess like we all understand you'll do what you can do, and you try to get as good as possible. And in relation to, like I said, the practical aspects, people still have to do their job and everything like that. But then I guess the counterpoint to that is it would be a good practice to measure it. We see this in business. You put KPIs on everything, you get what you measure. How would you measure success in cybersecurity other than just have we been hacked or not?
Yeah, I've talked about metrics quite a bit, but I haven't mentioned, which ones we're seeing, and I don't think we're seeing a real defined set. I think companies are experimenting, based on their operations, based on their industry. Some of the common ones that I can think of would be like the percent of network traffic that's been flagged as anomalous, which again doesn't even mean it's bad. Like I said in my presentation, if you're using AI, if you're using some probability here, you might get some things flagged that are false flags, but like you at least see these flags, right? And it shows that like, and if you're really tracking it and monitoring over a month, you're probably not going to have like a week or a day where you're like 0%. We never saw any bad traffic. So I think you're always going to have something there to present and to talk about what steps are being taken. On the education side, it can be something like the percent of employees that have clicked on a fake phishing email that the IT team has sent out. So the IT team might send a fake phishing email, and they capture how many people do that. They send out education on like, here's how to figure it out. And then some months later, they do it again, and they figure out if the education took hold. And then like outside audits, if companies are doing outside audits regularly, it would be the number of vulnerabilities found in an outside audit. So I think those are some examples. Like I said, I think a lot of companies are finding a lot of different metrics that they can use that resonate the most with them and with their management.
Something else that I'm seeing. Oh, sorry, Guillaume.
No, go ahead.
Something else that I'm seeing, in addition just to the click rate of those, fake phishing emails that the team is sending out, we're also seeing people picking up reporting rate, which is really cool to see because it's not just what went wrong, but also tracking what goes right. How many of those folks are reporting, saying things like, oh my goodness, I clicked on something and I'm reporting it. Or they just reported at the outset and they didn't actually click it. Because the reporting is really important, of course, for us to be able to quarantine, and quarantine means something totally different under COVID-19 now, right? Isn't that crazy? But anyway.
Yeah, they stole our word.
Their machine, right? They stole our word, and make sure that we can keep them safe and all of their materials safe. So that's a really cool new metric that I recommend and that I'm seeing a lot of people pick up.
On top of everything that was mentioned, we do all those things at Sherweb, so I'm pretty proud of that. Like I think the last one we started, which is probably kind of underlines a point why it's important to do it and everything, is the testing and measuring that baseline of how people interact with those tests. I think it's an easy one to measure. I'm not saying it's an easy problem to address, but at least you can create a baseline and measure yourself against the baseline. The only one that wasn't mentioned, we've done a lot of vulnerability scanning, and then we use that as a baseline where we started, and we decide like, hey, we want to reach, like, address all the critical, all the important, and then like whatever, have percentages of everything. That one you can also measure against over time, because otherwise the number of attacks or the percentage of anomalous traffic is so dependent on how well you measure. Because if I turn off my detection, then I have 0% anomalous traffic. It becomes it's a moving target, is I think what a lot of people are seeing with cybersecurity. So that was a good one. Somebody asked to me, I appreciate it. Pattern recognition via AI is one of the latest trends for dynamic policies, which is one of the we mentioned for behavioral analysis. Are these available used in iTunes? So more of a technical question. So specifically, if you look to Microsoft, right, and the online version of the tools, they put AI as part of it, but I have to say, even 3 years ago at RSA, 100% of the product said AI on it. So what's on the tin is it's easy to stretch the term AI. Machine learning is AI. Machine learning is what computers have done since the beginning of time. We do it at a much bigger scale. I think somebody that specializes in machine learning would argue what I just said. But what I mean is, yes, to answer your question, but yes, Microsoft says that's part of it. I think it's not the, what's the expression in English, panacea that people hope it would be. Like, I turn on AI and suddenly I'm not at risk of anything, like nothing can happen. We've said it's layers. If you can get machine learning to be part of those layers, I think it's a good place to cover volume. Like, nobody will look at logs of 1 million entries every day. So that's where you need to leverage that. But after that, if your people aren't trained, if you don't have the right controls in place, things like that, it kind of falls apart. But yes, it's part of Microsoft's suite of cybersecurity.
If I can just build off of that question, something I've been curious about with respect to, say, social engineering. So this is a question for Rachel, obviously. Just say, how do you see, say, the development and the advances in AI? How do you see that, say, impacting social engineering and the like?
Yeah, this is something that people love to talk about. They're always thinking about our robot overlords coming in and hacking everybody, right? Right now, I would say AI is not a huge part of my everyday life when I'm hacking and doing, coming up with my pretext, who I'm pretending to be. But in the future, I can imagine a world where 2 years from now, we use AI to scan. Let's say I have a target. Let's say, Henry, you're my target. I keep picking on you because I think you're.
That's fine. I have a
So,
face built for targeting.
Let's say I'm like, I want to target Henry, so I'm going to look at Henry's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all these things, and use AI to find workstations whenever he talks about what products he uses and services, to get a sense of who I should pretend to be when I'm contacting him. Then AI could maybe recommend to me what pretext I should be using for my attacks, right? That's the type of thing that we could imagine happening. Do I do that right now? No. A lot of times my OSINT will take me 100 hours when I'm really targeting something really hard. So no, it doesn't happen right now, but I can imagine a world where it could.
So my takeaway there. Oh, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, it's a really interesting answer, because I think when we've been talking about AI at CompTIA and a lot of other emerging technologies, we've really been emphasizing that these things are not like traditional technologies that someone would go out and buy like a product and plug it into their rack and be like, I now have AI. It is a part of the solution. So like, Rachel just described, I've got the solution, I've got this process that I'm doing. Now I'm going to bring in AI and enhance that. So that's how people should be thinking about it, with respect to their security or whatever they're doing, that, they're not going to go out and get a product and implement it, and all of a sudden, the lights are going to come on and everything's going to be working. They have to have the process there, and these new technologies are probably going to enhance the processes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could definitely see AI speeding up the hacking process, but I imagine that humans will need to be involved still.
It could allow you to harvest on a much grander scale. Like, you have your process, you need this kind of information to generally be successful with a target. And you say, instead of looking at 100 people that I can figure out, I'm going to unleash AI and find me the best possible targets by looking at many more signals.
Right.
I definitely agree with what you both said. One, I want to come back to a point that you made, I think in passing. You said, if I'm being attacked by somebody that's patient and not lazy, which I think is an important distinction. Would you say most attackers are lazy? And would you say it's a little bit of a protection to most people, where we won't get dedicated people attacking us? Like, I'm definitely not famous. These webinars have a great reach, but it hasn't made me a YouTube sensation. Would you say that's kind of the security through obscurity, where people just, we wouldn't be target?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of nuance to your question. When you say, are most attackers lazy? I would say most attackers are probably not lazy, but the prevalence of the lazy attackers' attacks is higher. And so you're more likely to encounter a lazy attacker than a non-lazy attacker, simply because a lazy attacker sprays and prays, right? But I know, I understand what you're saying. Are most people going to encounter a lazy attacker? I would say if you came up to me and said, I've never received a phishing email or something spammy, I'd be like, I don't believe you. There's no way. It's probably just that you don't know that you have been. I'd say most people on the planet who use the internet and have an email address have received a spam from one of those lazy attackers trying to gain access to an AOL account, for example, right? Or something like that. Now, you never know why somebody would target another person. There are some people out there who are just weirdos, right? And so, Guillaume, you might not be a YouTube sensation, but they might see you and be like, Guillaume is so cool. I want to be Guillaume. I'm going to attack Guillaume, right? We don't know why. We don't know their motivations, and a lot of times we'll never know. So I really want people to operate under the assumption that they are famous and try and protect themselves as best as possible while not going overboard and thinking that every single threat is going to happen to them. Because there's certain types of threats that if you're a politician, I guarantee you it's going to happen at least once in your campaign. But, you know, Guillaume, you might see it once in a lifetime instead of once a quarter.
Right. I think that's part of the problem that our clientele have to deal with security conversation, is that a lot of it is targeted to those bigger enterprise situation like that, where they're small, medium businesses. And I think that has been an excuse that has been used a lot not to address security in smaller businesses. I think just to sort of tie things together, I think for the attackers, AI and automation, it's more automation than AI to me, but we'll keep that's what attackers do, is they find they always find new way. They try to make it easier and easier to get what they want, so that the return on investment as a business to hacking is better and better. So I think that will bring more and more of the attack that we would consider fancy attacks right now into just any kind of business. We run a security software at Sherweb called Office Protect for Microsoft 365. And without getting into that, it has allowed us to see a lot of the attacks that people sort of fall for, or at least being attacked with. And I'm surprised, for example, business email compromise, the small targets, like very, very small business that clearly don't have a ton of money, and still like I think it's an automated initial process, and wherever they get a little bit in, then they'll invest their time to get all the way in. And
Sure.
For the people that are here that are in smaller business or consider that sort of their main reason not to get deeper into cybersecurity, I think you're sort of playing with fire over time. It will eventually be bad, to make it oversimplify a little bit.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have heard quite a few people say, I'm a small to medium-sized business, like I'm not a target, right? They're going to go after Microsoft. They're not going after me. There are some cases where that could be possible, where you are so obscure and nobody knows you exist. But if you have a presence online, it's possible that someone's going to go after you. I know as an attacker, it is hard for me to attack small to medium businesses, but it's not that hard if I'm going after like a 2-person team, right? You know, you have 5 people. I'm not going to impersonate somebody who works with you, because you know exactly what they sound like, and my voice changer can't get it exact. That's something that I'm going to use at a larger size company. But I can pretend to be a vendor of yours. I can pretend to be somebody on the outside. What about somebody who's calling from your local office saying that your business license needs to be updated? Click here, right? Those are the little types of things that are going to go after SMBs that I really hope people understand. Those attacks are easy for me to affect, and that you're not immune. It is important. Don't freak out about it. Don't, it's not fear, uncertainty, doubt. We know what the parameters are. You do have to protect yourself, but you have to understand your threat.
That kind of converges with a question that was asked to the panel. In fact, it's like I guess this person has run into these very problems with this conversation with their customers or their prospects, and the question is just, what is the most convincing argument to get a small company or a small office to spend this money on, say, for example, just on vulnerability scanning or risk assessments? That's so it's a question to both of you, I'd say.
Yeah, I think we mentioned it before, like. So there's the cost to the business, and those numbers can be pulled from a lot of different sources. Here's the average cost to the business, and the one to really dig into is like sort of the average cost per seat, because the average cost to a business, that average number gets swelled by the big boys. But if you get to average cost per seat, then a small business can say, oh, okay, if that happened 10 times, then I'm in trouble. There's another chart that I've seen out there that, people, I don't remember the exact source now, but it was a couple of years ago I saw the number of attacks that were happening per company size. And it starts off kind of the way you would expect. Most of the attacks are with the bigger companies, and then the smaller it gets, the lower the attacks go. And then all of a sudden, right at the end, the very smallest companies, it skyrockets again, because the defenses are so low, because that target is so easy. And so I think that type of data combined is kind of like, here's a financial risk. It's similar to the financial risk of your office burning down. So how much are you spending on insurance? How much do you want to spend on cybersecurity? That's the kind of discussion that has to happen.
Tied to that, and I know, maybe there is, and I hope there is, maybe there isn't a clear answer to this, but how do you determine, like, what, or sort of maybe just give people hints in what direction to go, but what path would would help you determine how much security is enough? And I think that's both true when we're talking more social and engineering, human hacking, and then just technically.
Yeah, a lot of times I'm sitting down with an org and I can find out, what their processes are and the gaps in those protocols and systems in 2 hours, right? And so a lot of times people think of cybersecurity as this like massive hurdle that they have to get over. Just take a small step. Talk to a hacker, talk to somebody who's an expert, get a sense of what are our gaps, what are the ways that you would get in, and do we feel like we would be able to defend against that? If the answer is no, take one small first step. Whether that's changing your protocols, looking into some sort of technical tools to defend. Just one small step will protect you, because if I'm an attacker and I'm lazy, which a lot of times I am, I'm going to go after people who are easy to attack. And if you have one small defense, I'm going to be like, never mind, moving on to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think the question of how do you know how much security is enough, that more than any other IT question doesn't have an answer, because it's tied into the risk analysis part, right? It's like, how much risk are you willing to tolerate? And that's a business decision. That's like the culture of your organization, and you have to sit down and hammer that out. You can't just say, well, I want this big of a network pipe, right? It's not the same thing. It's a really in-depth discussion that most companies haven't done yet, but they're starting to do.
Okay, so we're coming up on time. One last question for Rachel, maybe. If people could change one thing about their security posture, we talked about it, like we have to evaluate risk assessment. Let's give something for people to start on. Like if they could change one thing, what would you change, or what would you recommend they change?
Yes, I would sit down with them and talk to them deeply about their password management. Like, if you could do anything today, I would say, don't be one of those 52% of people, just the folks that admit on the Google security survey that they reuse their passwords. Get a password manager. Your threat model might be such that, let's say you're sitting down with your great aunt, right? And your great aunt's like, I can't be bothered. I'm 97. Like, come on, who's gonna go after me? Sit down with your great aunt and say, I hear you, I get it. People do target folks like yourself. A notebook is enough for your great aunt. You're going to have InfoSec folks all over the world who are like, no notebooks, don't write things down on Post-its, right? Is your great aunt taking a picture of her workstation and posting that on Instagram? It's unlikely, right? It's unlikely. So you can probably write down the 25 passwords that your great aunt uses on a daily basis, weekly basis, and keep those unique. If you want to put it in a lockbox, that's great. But I really hope that people understand that there is a way for you to do that. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're my great aunt or you are, Kamala Harris, right? And we really do have to make sure that those things are set aside and they are unique, and you have MFA as well. If you can do that, it's going to be really hard for me to gain access to your machines. You might be too tough, and I'm just going to move on, unless I'm targeting you specifically, Henry.
Well, actually, there's good advice in there where if people are uncertain about their security skills and how to pitch it, they can start with their grand aunt. And for example, if I could sell security to my mother, then I think we're on our way. I can pitch it to anybody, or maybe try to hack them. That'd be interesting as well.
Just let me know, Guillaume, if you want me to hack your mother. Be happy.
Yeah, she's now connected. It took forever, but she now has a online footprint, so there is something there. but I don't think I want to know. And no. Also, I would have to fix it, which also no. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for being here, the panelists, the audience, everybody. So Seth from CompTIA, everybody, please take the time to check out CompTIA. Free, neutral. I mean, what else do you want? Like, take 5 minutes and definitely check it out. As Seth mentioned, there is a number of things that they do. So it's not just cybersecurity. It's not just research. It is that and much more. We're involved in a number of groups with them and things like that. There's meeting, there's regional groups, there's everything.
There's a lot going on.
Sorry?
There's a lot going on. A lot of
Yeah.
places for people to plug in and get some benefit.
That's right. So you can just find the part that you find most helpful and start there, and then you'll see how helpful it is to be part of such a community. I want to thank Rachel of SocialProof. So same thing. I assume if people are interested in what you were conveying, check out either you online. I'm sure although there's no sensitive information, I'm sure there's lots of information online now. And also check out SocialProof Security. Henry is every day at Sherweb. So if you want to check him out, easy, just check us out. Anybody that's not a partner, again, take the time to check us out at sherweb.com. If you are a partner, talk to your account representative about cybersecurity. They've been trained, they know more and more, we have more and more material. I want to thank everybody for participating and have a good rest of your day.
Don't forget, there's a quick poll at the end of this.
Thanks, Henry. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
See you on
Thanks,
the
everyone.